The day Dante Bellini sent his own wife to prison for betraying his mafia empire, he never gave her the chance to finish a single sentence. As federal officers dragged Elena Monroe Bellini toward the waiting prison van, the beautiful plus-size woman twisted against their grip and reached desperately toward her husband. "Dante, I'm carrying your child." But before he could hear the rest, a voice called sharply from behind him. Another Bellini location had been attacked. Another one of his men was dead, and once again, the evidence pointed toward Elena. Dante looked at his wife. For one brief moment, Elena thought he might finally listen. She had begged him for weeks to investigate, to check the security records, to trace the missing money, to question the people who had access to their home. She had told him again and again that someone was setting her up. But Dante Bellini had already made his decision. The evidence was too convincing. The betrayal had cost too much blood, and the woman standing before him wore the face of someone he no longer believed he knew. "Dante, please!" The officers pulled Elena closer to the van. "There's something you need to know." Dante remained where he was. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She tried one final time. "I'm carrying your—" The metal door slammed shut, and Dante turned his back. He never heard the final word, never saw Elena lower her cuffed hands protectively over her stomach, never knew that while he stood outside believing he had just removed a traitor from the Bellini family, his unborn child was being carried away with her. Dante had enough money to hire the best attorneys in Chicago, enough influence to make problems disappear, enough power to make almost anyone afraid of crossing him. But when Elena begged him to fight for her, he ordered every Bellini lawyer to stand down, and the prison doors closed. Months later, a sealed report arrived at the Bellini estate. Dante read it in silence, then read it again. Whatever was written on those pages ended with his signature at the bottom, and Elena Monroe Bellini became a name no one inside his estate dared mention again. Years passed. The Bellini empire grew stronger. Dante grew colder. And the truth remained buried, until one ordinary financial investigation uncovered a payment that should never have existed. Then another. Then a security record that did not match the original. Dante began digging, quietly at first, but the deeper he went, the more the case against Elena began falling apart. And when the final piece landed on his desk, Dante Bellini discovered the horrifying truth. His wife had been innocent. The woman he had condemned had never betrayed him. She had gone to prison carrying his child, and somewhere during the years, Dante believed there was nothing left to find. Elena had survived. She was alive. Somewhere beyond Chicago, the wife Dante had abandoned had built an entirely new life. She had raised the son he never knew. She had learned to live without the Bellini name, without his protection, without him, and the moment Dante discovered she was alive, he began searching. City after city, record after record. Every trail Elena had spent years burying, Dante began uncovering. Until one night, an address finally appeared on the screen in front of him. Dante stared at it for several seconds. After years of believing Elena was gone, he had finally found her. But Dante had no idea that somewhere else in Chicago, another person had just received the same information. Someone who had spent years making sure Elena never spoke. Someone who knew exactly what would happen if Dante learned the whole truth. And while Dante Bellini was racing toward the wife he had once condemned, the person who destroyed Elena the first time was already on the way to silence her again. 3 weeks before Elena Monroe Bellini was taken away in handcuffs, she still believed her husband would choose her over everyone else. It was a belief built on 3 years of marriage, and one that was already beginning to crack. The Bellini estate sat behind 12-foot iron gates on the northern edge of Chicago, surrounded by stone walls, security cameras, and enough armed men to make uninvited visitors reconsider every decision that had brought them there. Inside, everything appeared perfect. Polished marble, quiet servants, imported furniture, Fresh flowers replaced every morning. Men in dark suits, moving through corridors with phones pressed to their ears. And at the center of it all, Dante Bellini. Men lowered their voices when he entered a room. Business owners answered his calls before the second ring. Politicians who pretended not to know him somehow remembered his birthday. Dante did not need to threaten people often. His reputation usually arrived before he did. Yet the only person in the Bellini estate who occasionally looked at him as though he were simply a stubborn man who had forgotten to eat lunch was his wife. Elena had never quite fit the image people expected beside Dante Bellini. She wasn't interested in becoming intimidating. She didn't spend her days studying which society wife had worn which designer to which charity dinner. And despite the whispers that had followed her since the wedding, the comments about her curves, her background, and whether a woman like Elena Monroe truly belonged beside a Bellini, she had never tried to shrink herself to make anyone else comfortable. She was beautiful. Soft where the women Dante's world celebrated preferred sharpness, elegant without appearing rehearsed, and far more observant than most people realized. That last quality was about to become dangerous. For nearly 2 months, something inside the Bellini organization had been going wrong. At first, the problems were small. A shipment scheduled to arrive at a private warehouse was stopped by police less than an hour before arrival. A Bellini-owned construction company suddenly found itself facing an audit. Then one of Dante's private meeting locations was compromised. Nothing valuable was taken. No one was killed, but somebody knew where it was. Somebody who shouldn't have known. Dante responded the way Dante always responded. He tightened everything. New passwords, new guards, routes changed, phones replaced. Access to sensitive information reduced to a handful of people. Yet the leaks continued. And each time they did, someone found a reason to mention Elena. Never directly. That would have been too obvious. Victor Bellini was far too intelligent for obvious. Dante's older cousin had served at his side for 11 years. He knew precisely how much pressure to apply before suspicion began growing by itself. One evening, while Dante reviewed the latest security reports in his office, Victor stood near the window with a glass of whiskey he barely touched. The conversation had already lasted 20 minutes before Elena's name appeared. Almost casually, Victor mentioned that someone had accessed a schedule from Dante's home office. Then he paused. Dante looked up. Victor didn't accuse anyone. He merely reminded Dante that Elena sometimes entered that office. That was all. A seed, nothing more. 2 days later, Camilla Rossini planted another. Camilla had been attached to the Bellini organization long before Elena became part of it. Elegant, controlled, always useful. She managed legitimate business connections, charity arrangements, and the endless social machinery required to make criminal wealth look respectable. And she had never particularly liked Elena. She was too careful to show it. Instead, Camilla smiled, complimented Elena's dresses, asked about her charity work, then quietly noticed things at convenient moments, like the evening she mentioned seeing Elena speaking privately with a man outside a Bellini-owned restaurant. The man had once worked for a shipping company connected to the Marino family. Dante said nothing, but that night, he asked one of his men for the man's name. Elena noticed the change in her husband before she knew what had caused it. Dante had always been quiet. Now his quietness felt different. He watched, measured, asked questions he pretended were casual. Where had she been that afternoon? Who called her during dinner? Why had she needed access to his office the previous Thursday? Elena answered every question. Still, something remained behind Dante's eyes. Suspicion. It hurt more, because he refused to admit it existed. One evening, she found him alone in the dining room, long after the household had eaten. His dinner sat untouched. Elena stopped in the doorway. "You're doing it again." Dante lifted his eyes. She nodded toward his plate. The staring at food until it apologizes thing. Under different circumstances, he might have smiled. That night, he didn't. Elena crossed the room and sat opposite him. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Dante asked whether she had known her father's shipping company once handled containers for a Marino-controlled business. Elena stared at him. Of course she knew. Her father had operated one of the largest independent shipping companies in Illinois. He had handled cargo for hundreds of clients. Many had connections he never knew about. Dante's expression remained unreadable. Elena understood then. This was not curiosity. It was an interrogation, dressed as conversation. Something cold settled inside her. You think I'm involved in what's happening? Dante denied it too quickly. Elena looked at him for several seconds. Then she stood. She did not shout. She did not cry. That almost made it worse. I married a man who told me everyone in his world would eventually question my loyalty, except him. She left the room before Dante could answer. He remained at the table. For the first time that evening, he looked uncomfortable. But discomfort wasn't enough to stop what had already begun. Because while Dante was wondering whether Elena could be involved in the leaks, Elena herself had discovered something. 3 weeks earlier, she had been reviewing financial records for the Bellini Foundation. It was legitimate work. Scholarships, medical grants, small business funding. One payment had caught her attention because the invoice number didn't match the organization's accounting system. Elena assumed it was a clerical error. Then she found another, and another. All relatively small compared with the millions moving through Bellini businesses. But together, they formed a pattern. Money was leaving legitimate Bellini companies and passing through several consulting firms before disappearing. Elena traced one company. It had no employees. No proper office. Another had been incorporated only 6 months before receiving its first Bellini payment. The third belonged to a holding company registered under an attorney she recognized, an attorney who frequently worked with Victor. Elena stopped. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen. Then she checked again. Same result. She printed nothing, downloaded nothing. She had lived around Dante long enough to know that paper trails could become dangerous things. Instead, Elena wrote 3 company names inside the back page of an old recipe notebook she kept in the kitchen. Then she closed the computer. She didn't accuse Victor, not yet. Victor was Dante's cousin, his underboss, the man Dante trusted with his life. Walking into Dante's office with half-finished financial connections and pointing at Victor Bellini would accomplish only one thing: make Dante wonder why Elena had been digging through records that weren't hers, so she kept searching, quietly. That was her first mistake. Her second was believing no one had noticed. Victor noticed everything. 2 mornings later, Elena entered the breakfast room and found him already there. He sat reading the newspaper, as though he had nowhere else to be. Early morning? Elena poured herself tea. Apparently, Victor smiled. His eyes dropped briefly toward the folder under her arm. Accounting papers. Nothing unusual. Still, the way he looked at them made Elena uncomfortable. He asked about the foundation. Elena gave him a harmless answer. Victor nodded, then returned to his newspaper. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but when Elena walked away, Victor watched until she disappeared around the corner. That afternoon, the first major Bellini safe house was attacked. 3 men died. 1 disappeared. Dante arrived less than 20 minutes later. The building had been cleared before he entered, but there was still blood across the kitchen tiles. A broken chair lay beside the wall. One of the dead men had worked for Dante since he was 22. Dante stood over the body without speaking. Victor approached quietly. Nobody knew how the attackers had obtained the address. Only 7 people had access. Dante was one, Victor another, 3 senior captains, the security chief, and Elena. Not because Dante had intentionally given it to her. The address had been listed inside his private calendar. A calendar stored in his home office. Victor did not need to say her name. Dante thought it himself. That was the beauty of the trap. When Dante returned home that night, Elena was waiting. She had been waiting for hours. One look at his face told her something terrible had happened. She approached him. Dante stepped away before she could touch him. A tiny movement, barely anything, but Elena froze. Dante immediately seemed to regret it. He asked whether she had entered his office that week. Elena's confusion turned slowly into disbelief. She had. Tuesday morning. She had needed one of the foundation contracts from his cabinet. Dante asked whether she had opened his calendar. No. His eyes remained on her. Elena felt something inside her break. You don't believe me. Dante said nothing, and silence sometimes answered far more clearly than words. Elena walked upstairs alone. That night, she barely slept. By morning, she was sick. At first, she blamed stress. Then it happened the following morning, and the morning after that. Food smelled strange. Her body felt unfamiliar. She became exhausted halfway through ordinary afternoons. Then, one evening, while dressing for a Bellini charity event, Elena counted backwards, once, then again. She sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Her period was late, very late. The following afternoon, Elena visited a private clinic across the city. She did not use the Bellini driver. She took a taxi. She wore dark glasses and gave the receptionist her maiden name. 25 minutes later, Elena sat inside a quiet examination room while the doctor smiled. Congratulations. For several seconds, Elena didn't understand. Then she did. Her hand slowly moved toward her stomach. Pregnant. After nearly 3 years of marriage, after the private disappointments, the negative tests, the months she had stopped allowing herself to hope. There was a baby. Dante's baby. Elena laughed once, then covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. For the first time in weeks, something inside her felt light. Maybe this was what they needed, not the baby itself. Elena wasn't foolish enough to believe a child could repair broken trust, but perhaps this would finally make Dante stop. Listen, remember who she was. She left the clinic holding a small envelope. Inside, the first image of their child. Elena spent the entire drive home deciding how she would tell him. She would wait until they were alone. No Victor, no captains, no business calls, just Dante and Elena. She even smiled when the Bellini estate appeared beyond the gates. Then she noticed the guards. Too many. Every entrance was covered. Vehicles were being searched. Men were running toward the main house. Something was wrong. Elena stepped from the taxi. One of Dante's security men hurried toward her. Mrs. Bellini. Mr. Bellini wants everyone inside. Elena looked toward the house. What happened? The guard hesitated. That hesitation frightened her. Then he answered. Something had been stolen from Dante's private office. Something so dangerous. The Bellini estate had been completely locked down. Elena tightened her fingers around the envelope containing the ultrasound. She didn't know it yet. But before she could tell Dante they were having a child, someone was already inside their bedroom, planting the evidence that would send her to prison. The stolen object was smaller than Dante's palm. Yet if it reached the wrong hands, men would die. The encrypted drive contained locations, accounts, emergency routes, safe houses, names of people Dante had spent years protecting. Even some of his legitimate political connections were listed there. It was not supposed to leave his private safe. Only 3 people knew the current access code: Dante, his security chief, and Victor. By 7 that evening, every gate surrounding the Bellini estate had been locked. No servant left, no vehicle moved. Phones belonging to household employees were collected. Dante ordered every room searched, including his own, including Elena's. Elena stood near the staircase, holding the clinic envelope inside her handbag. Her excitement had vanished. Something about the atmosphere felt wrong, not merely dangerous, personal. Men who normally greeted her avoided eye contact. Camilla stood near the sitting room doors, with one hand folded elegantly over the other. Victor spoke quietly with Dante. Then, a shout came from upstairs. Everything stopped. One of Dante's men appeared at the top of the staircase. He was carrying Elena's suitcase, her old cream-colored suitcase, the one stored inside the dressing room. He brought it downstairs. Dante watched. The guard opened a section of torn lining and reached inside. The encrypted drive dropped into his gloved palm. Elena stared at it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then every face turned toward her. Elena almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because the situation was so absurd, her mind refused to understand it. "That isn't mine." Dante's gaze moved from the drive to his wife. Elena shook her head. "Dante, I've never seen that before." The guard confirmed where it had been found. Inside the lining. Hidden. Not accidentally misplaced. Hidden. Elena looked at the suitcase. She hadn't touched it in months. Anyone with access to their bedroom could have placed something there. She said exactly that. Dante said nothing. Victor stepped forward and asked the security chief whether anyone had entered Elena's room that afternoon. The chief promised to check. Elena's heartbeat accelerated. She looked at Dante. "Search the cameras. We are. Then search everything." There was anger in her voice now. Not fear. Someone put that there. Dante remained frighteningly calm. Elena knew that version of him. It was the Dante enemies feared most. The quieter he became, the more dangerous the situation was. Then another man entered carrying a laptop. Security access logs had been recovered. Dante's private office had been opened at 2:17 that morning, 3 nights earlier, using Elena's access card. Elena's stomach dropped. "That is impossible." Dante looked at her. She had been asleep beside him at 2:17 that morning. Surely he remembered. But Dante had left the bedroom around 1. A business call had kept him downstairs until nearly 4. Elena had been alone. No witness, no proof. Only a digital record saying her card had opened the door. Elena's voice lowered. "My card was cloned." Victor glanced at Dante. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Another piece arrived. Then another. A transfer of $250,000 into an account, opened under a company once belonging to Elena's father. Encrypted messages recovered from a disposable phone. A Bellini delivery schedule. Contact with a man tied to the Marino organization. Each piece alone could be questioned. Together, they looked devastating. Too devastating. Elena understood before Dante did. Someone hadn't simply hidden the drive. Someone had built an entire story around her, and they had been building it for weeks. Every suspicious conversation, every innocent connection, every question Dante had suddenly started asking. It all made sense. Her father, the restaurant, his calendar. Someone had been preparing Dante to believe this before the evidence ever appeared. Elena turned slowly toward Victor. He was watching Dante, not her. That bothered her more. Elena remembered the shell companies, the strange payments. The attorney connected to Victor. A cold thought formed. She almost spoke, then she stopped. She had no proof. And judging from Dante's expression, accusing the man he trusted most without proof might bury her completely. So Elena did something smarter. She asked Dante for 24 hours. Not freedom. Not blind trust. Time. Trace the money properly. Pull the original camera files. Check who accessed my room. Find out who duplicated my card. Dante finally looked directly at her. "Why were you investigating Bellini accounts?" Elena froze. That information had not been mentioned. "How do you know that?" Dante's jaw tightened. Victor answered instead. One of the finance managers had noticed Elena requesting old payment records. Elena looked at Victor, then understood. The finance manager reported to him. Elena's pulse quickened. She told Dante she had found irregular payments in foundation-linked companies. Dante asked why she hadn't come to him. Because she hadn't known what they meant yet. Because she didn't want to accuse someone without evidence. Because recently, Dante had already been looking at her like a suspect. Each answer only seemed to make the room heavier. Camilla finally spoke. Softly. Almost sympathetically. She suggested Elena might simply be overwhelmed. Elena turned toward her. Camilla's face was perfect concern, nothing more. Yet something inside Elena screamed. Danger. Then Dante's phone rang. He answered. Everyone watched his expression change. The attack had happened 12 minutes earlier. Another Bellini safe location had been hit. 2 men were dead. A third had been taken. The attackers had known exactly which entrance was temporarily unguarded. That information was on the stolen drive. Dante slowly lowered the phone. Whatever doubt remained in his eyes disappeared. Elena saw it happen, and suddenly she wasn't fighting planted evidence anymore. She was fighting dead bodies. Victor stepped closer to Dante and said something too quietly for Elena to hear. Dante's face hardened further. Elena crossed the room.
"Don't do this,"
He looked at her.
"You know me."
Dante's expression flickered. For 1 second, Elena saw the husband beneath the Mafia Boss. Then it vanished. "Take her phone." Elena stared at him. A guard hesitated. Dante repeated himself. This time, the guard obeyed. Elena slowly handed over her phone, then her keys, her access card, her handbag. The clinic envelope was still inside. Elena reached for the bag immediately. The guard stepped back. "My bag." Dante told the guard to search it. Elena's heart jumped. The ultrasound. This was not how she wanted Dante to learn. The guard began removing items. Wallet, cosmetics, receipts. Then, before he reached the inner compartment, Victor received another call. A kidnapped Bellini man had been found, barely alive. The room erupted into movement. Dante left immediately. Elena called after him. He didn't stop. The guard abandoned the handbag on the table and followed. Elena grabbed it. The ultrasound remained hidden. For another few hours, their baby's existence survived. But Elena's freedom did not. That night, Dante summoned an attorney, not to defend his wife, to discuss how much exposure the stolen files created for his legitimate companies. Several documents involved tax fraud, corporate bribery, and federal offenses. If the government acquired the evidence, they could dismantle businesses Dante had spent decades separating from the criminal side of the Bellini empire. Victor suggested a solution. Elena could be handed over as the source. The government already had an open investigation involving companies connected to her father. The forged evidence would do the rest. Dante did not answer immediately. Victor pressed carefully. If Elena had betrayed them, Bellini attorneys defending her would send the wrong message to every captain watching. Dante spent the night alone in his office. At 3:40 in the morning, he made the decision. No Bellini lawyer would represent Elena. No witness would be pressured. No Bellini influence would interfere. If Elena was guilty, she would face whatever came. By sunrise, federal agents were at the gate. Elena came downstairs wearing yesterday's clothes. She saw them, then saw Dante. Something inside her went still. He had chosen. She walked toward him, slowly. There were 20 people in the room. Elena spoke only to Dante. "You're handing me over?" Dante's silence answered. Elena swallowed, then nodded once. Not because she agreed, because suddenly she understood the kind of man standing in front of her. She had married Dante knowing he could be merciless toward enemies. She had simply never imagined how quickly she could become one. An agent stepped behind Elena and reached for her wrists. Dante looked away when the handcuffs closed. Elena noticed, and somehow that hurt more. She was taken from the estate. The investigation moved quickly, too quickly. Evidence appeared exactly where investigators needed it. Witnesses remembered convenient details. Financial records supported the government's case. A former Bellini employee claimed Elena had asked questions about safe houses. A technician confirmed her access card had opened Dante's office. The disposable phone was traced to a location near one of Elena's charity events. Every road ended at Elena. Her public defender argued manipulation. Prosecutors called it desperation. Elena asked Dante to testify about the night her card supposedly entered his office. He refused. She asked him to release internal Bellini security backups. He refused. She sent word asking for 5 minutes alone. No response. Then she sent another message. Not about the case, about the baby. That message never reached him, because by then, Victor Bellini had placed one of his own people between Elena and every piece of correspondence entering the Bellini estate. Weeks later, Elena stood inside a federal courtroom as the verdict was read. Guilty. The word seemed to echo forever. Elena did not collapse. She didn't scream. She placed one hand over her stomach, beneath the loose fabric of her dress. Her pregnancy still wasn't visible. The baby was safe, for now. At sentencing, Dante sat in the back row. Elena saw him immediately. It was the first time she had seen her husband in weeks. For one foolish second, hope returned. Maybe he had finally come because he doubted everything. Maybe he would speak. Maybe he would stop this. Dante did none of those things. He watched. The sentence was handed down. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, Dante was already leaving. That was when something inside her changed. Until that moment, Elena had been waiting for her husband to believe her. After that moment, she stopped waiting. But there was still one thing Dante needed to know. Their child. And when Elena was led outside toward the prison van, she saw him standing beside his SUV. One final chance. Elena called his name. Dante looked up. She tried to tell him. Then Victor appeared. News of another attack reached Dante, and before Elena could finish, the prison van door closed between them. Dante turned away. Inside the van, Elena lowered both cuffed hands toward her stomach. No tears fell this time. Only one thought remained. If Dante Bellini refused to protect her, then Elena would protect their child herself. She just didn't know yet that someone had already decided that neither mother nor child could ever be allowed to return to the Bellini family. The first thing prison took from Elena was her name, not officially. The paperwork still read Elena Monroe Bellini, but names meant very little behind those walls. To officers, she was a number. To other inmates, she was the Mafia Boss's wife. And to the women who had lost brothers, fathers, husbands, or sons to families like the Bellinis, Elena was something worse, a target. The prison administration placed her in protective housing during her first weeks, not out of kindness, out of liability. Everyone knew who Dante Bellini was. Rumors spread anyway. Some said Elena had stolen millions from him. Others claimed she had testified against the family. A few insisted Dante had personally arranged her imprisonment because she had cheated. The truth became irrelevant. Prison had its own appetite for stories. Elena learned quickly. Keep her head down. Watch before speaking. Never let anyone see fear twice. And above everything, protect the baby. Her pregnancy became increasingly difficult to hide. Morning sickness struck violently. She lost weight, then regained it. Her uniforms stopped fitting correctly. At night, Elena lay on the narrow mattress with both hands over her stomach, listening to doors slam somewhere beyond the corridor. Sometimes she imagined Dante beside her. Those were the nights she hated most, because anger was easier than missing him. 3 months into her sentence, Elena collapsed. She had been carrying a laundry bin across the work area when the room tilted. The basket slipped. White sheets spilled across the floor. Then everything went dark. When Elena opened her eyes, a woman in blue medical scrubs stood over her, mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm hands. Her badge read, Marisol Reyes, RN. Marisol asked several routine questions. Elena answered carefully. Then Marisol asked when she had last seen an obstetrician. Elena's silence gave her away. Marisol stared at her. You're pregnant. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her stomach. Fear appeared immediately. Marisol noticed. Elena begged her not to put anything in general circulation. She knew medical information wasn't supposed to become gossip, but this wasn't ordinary gossip. This baby belonged to Dante Bellini. If rival families learned that Dante's pregnant wife was sitting inside a federal prison with almost no protection, they wouldn't see a child. They would see leverage. Marisol understood faster than Elena expected. She didn't promise the impossible. The pregnancy had to be documented medically, but she could restrict unnecessary access, and she could make certain Elena was moved away from strenuous labor. It wasn't much. Inside prison, it felt like everything. Weeks passed. Elena's stomach grew. Her child kicked for the first time one rainy Tuesday evening. Elena froze, then laughed quietly. Her cellmate looked over in confusion. Elena said nothing. She placed her palm against the movement. Again, a tiny kick. For several minutes, the walls disappeared. There was no prison, no Dante, no Bellini Empire, only Elena, and the little life reminding her she was no longer alone. That night, she wrote Dante another letter. She had written 6 already. This one was different. She stopped defending herself, stopped begging him to investigate. Instead, Elena told him about the baby, the heartbeat, the estimated due date, the tiny movements she had started feeling. She enclosed a copy of the ultrasound Marisol had helped her obtain from the prison hospital. At the end, Elena wrote that Dante did not have to forgive her. He didn't even have to believe her innocence, but he needed to understand that whatever existed between them, their child had done nothing. She sealed the envelope, addressed it personally to Dante Bellini, and watched it disappear into outgoing mail. 3 days later, it arrived at the Bellini estate. Dante never saw it. A member of the household security staff removed it before the morning correspondence reached Dante's office. The envelope was delivered to Victor. Victor read it alone. His expression changed when he reached the ultrasound. Elena was pregnant. For the first time since the plan began, Victor looked genuinely worried. Framing Elena had solved one problem. A Bellini heir created another, especially if that child was Dante's. Victor folded the letter, placed it back inside the envelope, then locked it in a drawer. He didn't destroy it. Victor had always believed evidence was more useful than ashes. More letters followed, one every few weeks. Victor intercepted all of them. Dante heard nothing, and gradually, Elena stopped expecting an answer. Winter arrived. Chicago disappeared beneath snow. Prison windows turned white with frost. Elena's due date moved closer. Marisol became stricter about her health. Extra food occasionally appeared on Elena's tray. Not enough to attract attention. Just enough. Prenatal vitamins somehow stopped running out. Appointments were scheduled during quieter hours. Elena understood what Marisol was doing. Neither woman discussed it. Kindness did not need an announcement. Then trouble came. A new inmate arrived in Elena's unit. Her brother had once worked for the Marino organization. Within 2 days, she knew exactly who Elena was. Within 4, other women knew Elena was pregnant. The whispers changed. Dante Bellini's baby, an heir, a bargaining chip. Elena heard the words while standing in the meal line. Her blood went cold. That evening, she told Marisol. By morning, Elena had been moved. Officially, medical observation. Unofficially, protection. Someone had started asking questions about when Elena attended appointments. Someone wanted to know whether she ever left prison grounds for hospital visits. Someone outside knew. Elena immediately thought of Dante. Perhaps one of his men had finally received her letters. Perhaps Dante was trying to protect the baby quietly. Hope rose. Then Marisol brought her a message. No Bellini attorney had contacted the prison. No relative had requested information. Nobody from Dante's organization had called. Elena looked away. Whatever hope remained disappeared. The threat was coming from somewhere else. 2 weeks later, labor started early. A violent winter storm had covered the roads. Emergency services were delayed across the city. Elena woke just after midnight, with pain cutting across her abdomen. At first, she said nothing. Then another contraction came, stronger. Marisol was summoned. One look at Elena, and she knew. The baby was coming. Too early, too fast. The prison medical unit prepared what they could. Elena gripped the side of the bed as another contraction tore through her. For hours, she refused to say Dante's name, but pain had a way of stripping away pride. Near dawn, Elena whispered it once. Not because she expected him, because some part of her still couldn't understand how the man who had once slept with an arm around her waist had no idea his child was entering the world. Then, just as grey morning light appeared beyond the barred window, a baby cried. Everything inside Elena stopped. Marisol smiled. A boy. Elena began crying before the child reached her arms. Tiny, warm, alive. She stared down at him. Dark hair, small clenched fists. a furious little expression that made Elena laugh through her tears. For the first time in months, she felt completely happy. Nico. She had chosen the name weeks earlier. Nico Monroe. Not Bellini. Not yet. Maybe never. Elena pressed her lips against her son's forehead. She made him one promise. He would never have to beg anyone to believe he deserved love. 3 days later, Elena wrote Dante again. No accusation. No anger. Only, your son was born. She included his weight, his birth date, and one photograph. Victor received that letter too. This time, he did not lock it away immediately. He stared at the photograph for a very long time. Then, he made a phone call. Elena never knew about it. Neither did Dante. Months became years. Prison changed Elena. Her softness did not disappear, but innocence did. She learned paperwork, appeals, deadlines, evidence rules. She spent evenings in the small prison library reading everything she could find about digital forensics and wrongful convictions. Other inmates began asking her for help filling forms. Elena became useful, and useful people survived differently. Meanwhile, cracks began appearing in the case against her. A digital specialist reviewing evidence during an appeal noticed that timestamps on 2 files didn't align. Then another expert questioned the metadata from the disposable phone. A security contractor could not locate the original server copy of the access log, supposedly proving Elena entered Dante's office. The government's case had once looked flawless. Now, small imperfections were appearing, one by one. Elena appealed, denied, appealed again. Then finally, after nearly 4 years, prosecutors faced a problem. If the case returned to court, they might have to explain evidence they could no longer authenticate. A deal was offered, reduced charges, time served, no public admission of wrongdoing. Elena stared at the paperwork. 4 years earlier, she might have refused. She wanted innocence. Her name cleared, the truth. But Nico was almost 4. His earliest memories were prison visiting rooms and Marisol sneaking extra crayons into supervised family sessions. Elena was done sacrificing her son to prove something to people who had already decided who she was. She signed. Her release date was set. For the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to imagine walking outside without permission. She imagined taking Nico somewhere with grass, buying him ice cream, sleeping in a room where the door did not lock from the outside. She did not imagine Dante. That surprised her. At some point, she had stopped building her future around whether Dante Bellini ever learned the truth. But someone else had been watching her case. Victor learned of the release before Dante did, and panic returned. If Elena walked free, she could investigate. She could reconnect with old accountants. She could show Dante the letters. She could tell him about Nico. Worse, she could make Dante curious. Victor couldn't allow that. 2 days before Elena's release, a Bellini contact inside the correctional system generated a report. A prison assault, severe injuries, complications. Then, death. The report contained Elena's full legal name, date of birth, prison number, official signatures, everything necessary to look real. The document reached Dante Bellini on a grey Thursday morning. He was inside his office when Victor placed the envelope on his desk. Dante opened it, read the first page, then stopped. For a long time, he said nothing. Elena was dead. According to the report, she had died before emergency treatment could save her. Dante stared at the page. Victor stood silently nearby. He expected anger, perhaps relief. Instead, Dante asked one question. Was she alone? Victor almost hesitated. Almost. Then he answered, yes. Something changed in Dante's face. Barely visible, but permanent. He signed the documents required by the Bellini attorney handling the notification, then closed the file. He did not ask to see Elena's body. He did not travel to the prison. He did not investigate. Once again, Dante Bellini trusted the paper placed in front of him, and once again, the paper loomed. 48 hours later, the real Elena Monroe walked through the prison gates. Marisol was waiting outside, and beside her, A little boy with dark hair was bouncing impatiently on his feet. The moment Nico saw his mother, he ran. Elena dropped her bag, fell to her knees, and caught him. For several seconds she couldn't breathe. She simply held her son beneath an open sky. No bars, no guards, no permission required. Marisol stood nearby, with tears in her eyes. Elena eventually looked back at the prison. 4 years. 4 years because somebody had needed Dante Bellini to believe she was guilty. 4 years because Dante had let them. Elena turned away. She never looked back again. Within 72 hours, she and Nico were gone from Chicago. New city, new number, new life. Elena Monroe disappeared. And inside the Bellini estate, Dante believed he had buried his wife. What neither of them knew was that Victor Bellini had made one mistake. He had hidden Elena's letters. He had hidden the ultrasound photographs. He had hidden Nico's birth announcement. He had hidden every piece of evidence connecting Dante to the son he never knew existed. But he had not destroyed them. And years later, when one suspicious payment forced Dante Bellini to begin opening doors everyone believed were permanently closed, those letters would be waiting. So would the truth. And once Dante read them, there would be nowhere in Chicago Victor Bellini could hide. 7 years after Elena Monroe Bellini disappeared from Dante's life, one number refused to balance. It should have meant nothing. Bellini companies moved millions every week. Restaurants, construction firms, warehouses, real estate, shipping contracts. Money entered through one door and left through another, so often that even experienced accountants sometimes needed days to trace a single transaction. But this payment was different. $187,000, transferred from a legitimate Bellini development company to a consulting firm that no longer existed. No invoice, no contract, no explanation. Dante stared at the transaction from behind his desk. Across from him stood Michael Ferraro, the forensic accountant Dante had recently hired after discovering irregularities inside several legitimate Bellini businesses. Michael had been working quietly for 6 weeks. He wasn't family. That was precisely why Dante trusted him with the audit. Dante had learned something during the years following Elena's supposed death. Blood did not automatically make a man loyal. Sometimes, it only gave him easier access to your throat. Michael slid another document across the desk. The consulting firm had received Bellini money several times. All payments occurred during the 6 months before Elena's arrest. Dante's eyes narrowed. There was more. The company had been registered through an attorney who once represented Victor Bellini. Dante said nothing. The room became very still. Victor remained his underboss, his cousin, the man who had stood beside him through wars, funerals, investigations, and betrayals, the man who had been there the day Elena was taken away. Dante leaned back slowly. "Keep digging." Michael hesitated. There were moments when men forgot Dante Bellini did not appreciate hesitation. What? Michael explained that someone had already accessed several archived accounts shortly before the audit began. Someone had attempted to remove old payment records. Dante's expression changed. That wasn't bookkeeping. That was fear. He ordered Michael to make copies of everything. Then he did something he should have done 7 years earlier. He investigated quietly, before accusing anyone. For the next 11 days, Dante told Victor nothing. He attended meetings, shared meals, discussed business. Even laughed once when Victor complained about one of the younger captains purchasing a sports car bright enough to be seen from another state. Everything appeared normal, but behind closed doors, Dante was opening the past. Old surveillance systems were recovered from storage. Retired employees were located. Security contractors were questioned. Digital backups were restored from forgotten servers. The first major crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. The access log that had supposedly proved Elena entered Dante's office at 2:17 a.m. had been edited. Dante stared at the screen. The technician enlarged several timestamps. The version presented during Elena's case showed her security card being used, but the original server log contained something else, a master override. The identification number belonged to the Bellini security division. Not Elena. Dante felt something cold crawl slowly through his chest. Who had access to that override? The technician gave him 4 names. One was dead, one had retired to Florida, one had been in Europe during the week of the theft, and the 4th had worked directly beneath Victor. Dante dismissed everyone from the room. For nearly 20 minutes, he sat alone. No movement, no calls, no whiskey, only silence. Then he opened an old drawer inside his desk. Elena's wedding ring was there. The government had returned it after her supposed death. Dante had never known why he kept it. Perhaps because throwing it away felt too much like admitting what he had done. Perhaps because some punishment deserved to remain close. He picked it up. 7 years earlier, Elena had stood before him and said someone had cloned her card. Dante had looked at the evidence and refused to believe her. Now, the evidence itself was telling him she had been right. But Dante was not ready to accept the conclusion. Not yet. 1 altered record could be corruption. 2 could be coincidence. Dante needed certainty, so he kept digging. The financial trail opened next. The account supposedly connected to Elena's father's company had never belonged to Elena. It had been reopened months after her father's death, using forged corporate documents. Money entered, money left, then disappeared through 3 companies. The final destination, an offshore account, associated with a trust controlled by Victor Bellini. Dante stared at the report until the words blurred. His breathing remained steady. His hands did not. Another file followed. Then another. The disposable phone, allegedly used by Elena, had been activated by a Bellini employee. That employee had vanished shortly after Elena's conviction. Dante ordered him found. 48 hours later, the man was located in Nevada. He had been living under another name. When Bellini men brought him back to Chicago, he lasted less than 15 minutes under questioning. He admitted Victor had paid him. Not to hurt Elena, not directly, only to purchase phones, move documents, alter security access. Ask no questions. Dante dismissed the room. Then, for the first time, he allowed himself to say the words. Elena was framed. The sentence almost didn't sound real. 7 years of memory shifted beneath him, her face at the estate, her voice asking him to investigate. The handcuffs, the courtroom, the prison van. That unfinished sentence. Dante stood suddenly. His chair struck the wall behind him. Everyone outside his office heard it. No one entered. For the next 2 days, Dante barely slept. He reconstructed every hour surrounding Elena's arrest. Victor had always been there. Victor found connections. Victor produced witnesses. Victor explained missing records. Victor encouraged Dante not to interfere with the federal case. Victor delivered the report of Elena's death. Victor. The truth had not been hidden particularly well. Dante simply had never looked in the right direction. Because he had been too busy looking at his wife. That realization was worse than anger. It was humiliation. Not because Victor had fooled him, because Elena had begged him to search, and Dante had chosen pride instead. He finally ordered Victor followed. Quietly. No confrontation. Not yet. Dante wanted every piece. Every name. Every payment. Every accomplice. Then, Michael Ferraro found something unexpected. An archived storage payment. For years, Victor had rented a private document vault under another name. The lease had recently been renewed. Dante personally went there after midnight, with 2 men he trusted absolutely. The vault was smaller than expected. Grey metal shelves, old ledgers, company seals, duplicate contracts, photographs. Nothing looked important, until Dante noticed a black storage box pushed behind several binders. No label. He pulled it forward. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, all addressed to Dante Bellini. His heartbeat changed. The handwriting was familiar. He knew it before touching the first envelope. Elena. Dante stopped breathing for several seconds. Some envelopes had prison stamps. Some were yellowed. Others had never been opened. One had been resealed. Dante picked it up. His fingers felt strangely numb. The first letter was dated 4 months after Elena's imprisonment. He read it, standing beneath the harsh fluorescent light. Elena did not beg him to rescue her. She wrote about the pregnancy. She told him she had heard the baby's heartbeat. She told him the doctor believed everything looked healthy. Then came one line that forced Dante to stop reading. She hoped, even if he never forgave her, that he might someday love their child. Dante lowered the page. His eyes moved toward the bottom of the box. A photograph, small, black and white. An ultrasound. He picked it up. There were handwritten words on the back. Your child, 12 weeks. Dante sat down hard on the nearest chair. One of his men took an instinctive step toward him. Dante raised a hand. Stay back. He opened another letter. 20 weeks. Another ultrasound. Another. She had felt the baby move. Another. The baby was a boy. Another. A birth announcement. Dante's vision blurred. He read the date. Then again. His son had been born while Elena was incarcerated. His son. Dante pressed both hands against the table. Something broke loose inside him. Not loudly. There was no dramatic shout. No overturned furniture. Only a man who had spent years believing his wife died alone, slowly understanding she had given birth to his child, while he ignored every attempt she made to reach him. Then Dante found the photograph. Elena lay against a hospital pillow, exhausted, pale, her hair untidy, but smiling. A newborn rested against her chest. Dante stared at the baby's face. Dark hair, tiny nose. One fist curled near Elena's collar. His knees nearly failed him. Nico, the name appeared beneath the photograph. Nico Monroe, Dante whispered it once. His son's name. A name he should have known for years. Behind him, nobody moved. Dante opened another envelope, then another. The letters changed over time. Hope disappeared. Elena stopped asking whether he had received previous messages, stopped mentioning forgiveness. Eventually, she simply wrote about Nico, his first smile, his first tooth, the way he hated mashed peas, a fever that frightened her, a little wooden car Marisol somehow found for him. Dante read pieces of his son's childhood from paper, like a stranger reading about somebody else's family. And then the letters stopped, 4 years after Elena's imprisonment. The same year, Dante was told she had died. Dante stood. His face had become frighteningly calm. He turned toward one of his men. Find Victor! But Victor was no longer at home. He had left his apartment less than an hour earlier. His phone was off. His driver didn't know where he had gone. For the first time, Victor Bellini knew Dante was getting close. Dante ordered every Bellini exit watched. Airports, private terminals, train stations, highways. Then he returned to the estate. There was still one question. What had happened to Nico? If Elena died, where was his son? Dante contacted the prison. The records did not match. There was no death certificate issued by the state matching the report Victor had delivered. No morgue record. No burial record. No official confirmation. Dante's pulse accelerated. He ordered a complete search. Hours passed. Then the investigator called. Dante answered before the first ring finished. Elena Monroe was released. Silence. Dante gripped the phone. When? The date came. 2 days after the date listed on the report claiming she had died. Dante closed his eyes. Alive. Elena was alive. For 7 years, Dante had believed he was mourning a dead woman. She had been somewhere else, breathing, living, raising his son. He asked where she went after release. No answer. Records disappeared quickly. A temporary address. Then another. A name change application that had later been withdrawn. Cash transactions. Nothing stable. Elena had not merely moved. She had made herself difficult to find. Dante understood why. She had escaped prison. Why would she willingly remain somewhere Dante Bellini could reach her? For the next 3 weeks, Dante searched. He barely returned home. Old prison contacts, employment records, school enrollment databases, rental applications, medical claims. Anything connected to Nico Monroe? Nothing. Elena had been careful. Very careful. Then Dante remembered Marisol Reyes, the prison nurse. He found her living outside Milwaukee. Marisol did not welcome him. She opened the door, recognized his face, and immediately tried to close it. Dante stopped the door with one hand. He did not threaten her. He simply held up one of Elena's letters. Marisol froze. You received them? 7 years late. Something in Dante's voice made her look at him differently. Not kindly, but differently. She let him inside. Marisol told him about the pregnancy. Elena hiding it, the threats, the premature labor, Nico's birth, the letters, Elena's appeals, and finally, her release. Dante asked the question he had been dreading. Why didn't she come to me? Marisol stared at him. You watched them take her away. Dante had no answer. Marisol continued. Elena had spent years waiting for him to believe her. Eventually, she stopped. Before Dante left, Marisol gave him one piece of information. Elena had once mentioned wanting to live near water, somewhere quiet, somewhere Nico could ride a bicycle without armed men following him. That was all. Dante searched every record he could connect to that description. Then, late one night, Michael found it. A tax return under Elena's maiden name, a small bookkeeping company, a lakeside town several hours outside Chicago. Dante stared at the address. His heart pounded harder than it had during gunfights. He had found her. He grabbed his coat. But across the city, Victor Bellini received a different phone call. One of the men still loyal to him had seen the search report. Elena Monroe. Address confirmed. Victor went silent. Everything he had done, every payment, every body, every lie, could still be traced back to the woman he had failed to destroy. And if Dante reached her first, Victor knew there would be nowhere left to run. He opened a drawer, removed a gun, and made one decision. Dante Bellini could never hear Elena tell the whole story. Not now. Not ever. 2 cars left Chicago before midnight. One carried Dante toward the wife he had spent 7 years believing was dead. The other carried the man who had destroyed her life, and neither knew which one would reach Elena first. Elena Monroe had learned to love ordinary mornings. They were something she once took for granted. Coffee brewing, a school backpack abandoned beside the kitchen table, Nico complaining that one sock had mysteriously disappeared, sunlight moving across inexpensive countertops, no armed guards, no men whispering behind closed doors, no Bellini meetings, no fear that a ringing phone meant someone had died. Ordinary had become Elena's definition of wealth. Her apartment sat above a small grocery store near the lake. Below it, 2 blocks away, she rented a modest office where she prepared taxes, managed accounts for local businesses, and helped several women recently released from prison organize their finances. Nobody there knew the entire story. They knew Elena had been incarcerated. They knew her conviction had been questionable. They knew she had a son. That was enough. Nico was 7 now, too curious, too smart, and increasingly interested in the father Elena rarely discussed. She had never lied to him, but she had never told him everything either. When Nico asked where his father was, Elena said he lived far away. When he asked whether his father knew about him, Elena's answer became more complicated. I tried to tell him. Nico accepted that when he was younger. Lately, he asked more questions. Elena knew the day was coming when simple answers would stop working. She just never expected Dante Bellini to arrive before it did. That morning, Elena took Nico to school. She worked until noon, met a client, bought groceries, nothing unusual. But around 3, a black SUV appeared across the street from her office. Elena noticed immediately. Her body recognized danger before her mind did. Black SUVs were common. So were dark suits. But men who had lived inside the Bellini world moved differently. They didn't look around nervously. They looked around because they were trained to remember everything. Elena's hand tightened around the grocery bag. One man stepped from the SUV. Not Dante, a guard, older than she remembered. but familiar. Elena's blood turned cold. She backed toward the office. The second vehicle stopped. Then Dante stepped out. For 7 years, Elena had imagined this moment in hundreds of ways. In prison, she imagined screaming at him. After release, she imagined walking past him. Later, she stopped imagining him at all. Reality was quieter. Dante looked older. Not old, changed. There were faint lines near his eyes, more gray at his temples. His face remained hard enough to silence rooms, but something about the way he stood across the street felt unfamiliar. He wasn't surrounded by 10 men. He wasn't approaching. He simply stared. Elena couldn't move. Neither could Dante. 7 years disappeared. The Bellini estate, the courtroom, the handcuffs, the prison van, all of it returned in one violent rush. Dante finally stepped off the curb. Elena immediately raised one hand. Stop. He stopped. That shocked her. The old Dante would have kept walking. Elena's heartbeat hammered. How did you find me? Dante struggled to answer. Then he saw the boy. Nico came running from the corner, with a backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He had left school with Aaron Hayes, the attorney who had helped Elena during the final stage of her appeal, and later became a close family friend. Nico ran ahead of Aaron. Elena! He still sometimes called his mother by her first name, when excited, because he had heard half the town do it. Elena turned toward him. Dante followed her gaze, and the entire world seemed to stop. Nico had Elena's smile, but Dante's eyes. Dante knew immediately. He didn't need blood tests, documents, letters. The boy looked toward the strange man standing beside the black SUV, then toward Elena. Mum? Dante's face changed. One word. Mum. His son, standing 10 yards away, alive, healthy, 7 years old. Dante's eyes moved over every detail. The untied shoelace, the scraped knee, the dinosaur patch sewn onto his backpack. Things a father should know. Dante knew none of them. Nico moved closer to Elena. Aaron reached them seconds later. He looked at Dante. Recognition appeared immediately. Aaron had seen enough photographs during Elena's case. His expression hardened. He placed himself slightly between Nico and Dante. Dante noticed. Years earlier, that would have angered him. Now, it made something painful twist inside his chest. Another man instinctively protected Dante's son, because Dante had never been there to do it himself. Elena sent Nico upstairs with Aaron. Nico resisted. He wanted to know who the man was. Elena promised she would explain. Eventually, Nico looked at Dante once more, then disappeared inside the building. Dante watched the door long after it closed. He doesn't know me. It wasn't really a question. Elena folded her arms. No. Dante lowered his head. For several seconds, the feared Bellini boss had absolutely nothing to say. Then he reached inside his coat. Elena tensed. Dante stopped instantly. Slowly, he removed an envelope, one of her letters. Elena's expression changed. Dante held it out. I found them, she stared. All of them? Yes. For the first time, Elena's composure cracked. 7 years of unanswered letters, 7 years believing Dante had read them and chosen silence. You never got them? No. Elena looked away. It should have made things better. It didn't, because there were still months before the letters. Weeks when she stood accused, days when she begged him to investigate, a courthouse where he watched her conviction, a prison van where he turned away. The letters explained only part of his failure. Dante knew that too. I was wrong before you ever wrote the first one. Elena looked at him. No excuse followed. No blame. Dante told her what he had discovered. The altered logs, the accounts, the intercepted correspondence. Victor. Elena's eyes changed at the name. So Dante noticed. You knew. I suspected. Why didn't you tell me? Elena almost laughed. I did. That answer hit harder than anything else. Dante remembered. She had told him about suspicious payments. He had treated it as another reason to distrust her. Elena stepped closer, not affectionately, angrily. I asked you to check the money. I asked you to check your security. I asked you to question the people around you. Her voice never rose much. It didn't need to. You chose them. Dante absorbed every word. I know. No, you know now. Silence. Elena's eyes shone, but she refused to cry. You don't get to arrive 7 years later with an investigation and pretend the truth only became available yesterday. The truth was standing in front of you. Dante had no defense, so he offered none. I am sorry. Elena stared at him, then shook her head. Sorry is something you say when you step on someone's foot. She looked toward the upstairs window. You missed his entire life. Dante's eyes followed hers. Nico appeared briefly behind the curtain, then vanished. Dante's throat tightened. Elena asked what he wanted. That question was harder than expected. Dante could have said his wife, his son, his family, but those words suddenly felt like theft, so he answered differently. I wanted to know you were alive. Elena's expression softened for perhaps half a second, then hardened again. You know, Dante nodded. He understood the dismissal. He stepped backward. Then his phone vibrated. Dante looked at the screen. One message, from his security team. Victor disappeared. Possible vehicle heading north. Dante's eyes snapped toward the road. Every instinct inside him changed. Elena noticed immediately. What? Dante asked whether anyone knew she lived there. Elena frowned. Not from Chicago. How many people have your address? What happened? Dante moved toward her, then stopped himself before crossing the boundary she had given him. Victor knows you're alive. Elena went still. The sound of a vehicle turning onto the street reached them. Dante looked. Gray sedan. Moving too slowly. His hand went inside his coat. Elena, get inside. She didn't argue. Not because he ordered her. Because she saw the driver's face. She had seen that man before, years ago. At the Bellini estate, Victor's man. Elena turned. Nick. The first gunshot shattered the office window. Dante moved before the sound finished. He grabbed Elena and pulled her behind the stone corner of the building. Glass exploded across the sidewalk. Another shot struck the brick. Dante's guards returned fire. People screamed. The sedan accelerated. Then another vehicle appeared from the opposite direction. Dante realized immediately. The first car had been a distraction. Victor hadn't come to kill Elena from the street. He had come for Nico. Dante looked toward the apartment entrance. The door was open, and Aaron was standing inside, alone. Dante's blood turned to ice. Where's the boy? Aaron looked confused. He went downstairs looking for Elena. Dante turned. Across the alley, a man's hand closed around Nico's shoulder. The boy screamed. Dante Bellini had spent 7 years not knowing his son existed. Now, less than 20 minutes after seeing him for the first time, someone was trying to take him away. And this time, Dante was not turning his back. Nico kicked the man hard in the shin. It wasn't enough to escape, but it gave Dante 2 seconds. Sometimes, 2 seconds were everything. The man dragged Nico toward a waiting car. Dante crossed the alley at full speed. Another Bellini guard moved from the opposite side. The kidnapper saw them. He reached inside his jacket. Dante didn't hesitate. A gunshot cracked through the alley. The man's weapon fell. He collapsed against the car. Nico stumbled backward. For one terrifying second, the boy simply stood there, frozen. Then Dante reached him. He stopped himself inches away. Every instinct screamed to grab Nico. Check him. Hold him. Protect him. But Dante saw the fear in his son's face. To Nico, Dante was still a stranger holding a gun. So Dante lowered the weapon, slowly. Nico, the boy stared at him. Your mother's inside. Go. Nico ran. Straight past Dante. Straight toward Elena. Dante watched Elena fall to her knees and wrap both arms around their son. The sight nearly broke him. Not because Nico didn't run to Dante. Because Dante understood why he shouldn't. Police sirens sounded in the distance. Victor's men scattered. One vehicle escaped. Victor was not inside either car. He had sent others. Which meant the danger wasn't over. Dante approached Elena cautiously. We need to move. Elena held Nico tighter. "No!" Dante stopped. She looked furious. "I am not going back to your estate." Dante's first instinct was to argue. The estate was protected. Guards, walls, cameras, weapons. He could secure it within minutes. Then he remembered the lesson that had cost them 7 years. Elena knew something he didn't. So instead of ordering her, Dante asked, "Where do you want to go?" Elena looked surprised. She named a property outside town belonging to Aaron's sister. Remote, private, unknown to anyone connected to Bellini. Dante nodded. "Then that's where we go." No argument, no command. Elena noticed. There was no time to process it. Within minutes, Dante's men created a route. Aaron drove Nico. Elena insisted on riding with her son. Dante followed separately. The farmhouse stood miles from the main road. No neighbors nearby. Tree line on 3 sides. A small barn. One entrance from the road. Dante hated the security immediately. But he said nothing. Instead, he quietly placed men far enough away that Elena wouldn't feel surrounded. For 2 days, nothing happened. Nico avoided Dante. Dante stayed outside whenever possible. He spoke to Elena only about Victor. The investigation had accelerated. Several Bellini captains had turned. Accounts were frozen. Victor's companies were being searched. Camilla Rossini had disappeared. Then Dante received the call. Camilla had been arrested trying to leave the country. Faced with the financial evidence, she started talking. Victor had planned Elena's framing, but he hadn't acted alone. Several men inside Bellini security had helped. The attacks on the safe houses had been staged with Marino cooperation. Victor had sacrificed Bellini soldiers to make Elena's betrayal look real. Dante's hand tightened around the phone. His own men had died because Victor needed Dante angry enough not to think. It had worked. Camilla also revealed why Victor had wanted Elena removed. Elena's investigation into the Foundation accounts had brought her dangerously close to discovering that Victor had been stealing Bellini money for years. But there was something else. Something even worse. Victor had learned Elena was pregnant before Dante did. Through the intercepted letter. And from that moment, Nico became part of the problem. Dante's face went completely still. Camilla explained. Victor believed Dante without an heir would eventually become vulnerable. If Dante died, Victor stood closest to controlling everything. But a son changed that. Even a child, especially Dante Bellini's son. That was why Victor had monitored Elena after prison, why he arranged the false death report, why he needed her to disappear permanently. Dante ended the call, then sat alone inside the parked SUV for several minutes. His son had been endangered before birth, and Dante had unknowingly helped the man responsible. Anger rose, cold, precise, deadly. The old Dante wanted Victor dragged into a basement, wanted answers, wanted blood. Then Elena came outside. She had overheard enough of the conversation. "Where is Camilla?" "In custody." "And Victor?" "Still missing." Elena looked toward the farmhouse. Nico was inside with Aaron. Then she said something unexpected. "He'll come here." Dante turned. Elena explained. Victor had always underestimated her, but he wasn't reckless. Sending men to grab Nico had failed. Now every road, airport, and Bellini property would be watched. Victor needed leverage. He would not run without it. Dante considered her reasoning. His security team believed Victor would flee toward Canada. Elena disagreed. He doesn't want to escape empty-handed. Dante studied her. What does he want? Something you will trade everything for. Both looked toward the house. Nico. Dante immediately called his captain. He ordered the northern search reduced, then shifted men toward routes surrounding the farmhouse. His captain questioned the decision. Dante's answer was simple. Elena says he's coming here. No proof demanded. No second guessing. Elena heard him. 7 years earlier, she had asked Dante to trust her when trust mattered most. He hadn't. Now, with his son's life at risk, Dante acted on her word. Before dawn, Elena was proven right. A motion sensor, triggered near the western tree line. One man, then 2, then 4. Dante's guards stayed hidden. No gunfire. Not yet. Victor emerged last. He had changed clothes, shaved his beard, looked nothing like the polished underboss who once sat beside Dante at family dinners. Desperation had stripped away the disguise. Victor approached the rear of the farmhouse. Dante waited inside the barn. He could have ended it immediately. Instead, he needed Victor alive. Not for revenge, for Elena. A confession would help clear everything still attached to her name. Victor entered the barn, looking for a side route toward the house. The lights switched on. Dante stood 30 feet away. Victor stopped. For several seconds, the cousins simply stared at each other. Then Victor smiled. A tired, ugly smile. You finally listened to her. Dante's expression didn't move. Victor laughed quietly. 7 years late, the words landed. Dante allowed them to. Victor started talking. Perhaps because he knew it was over. Perhaps because men who believe themselves clever rarely resist explaining their cleverness. He admitted enough. The accounts, the cloned card, the drive, the Merino attacks, the letters, the death report. Dante recorded every word. Then Victor said the one thing designed to wound him. Elena was easy to frame. Dante's eyes darkened. Victor continued, not because she was careless, because you were ready to doubt her. Silence. You loved her, but you trusted the Bellini name more. Dante did not deny it. That disturbed Victor. He wanted anger, excuses, anything that would make Dante easier to provoke. Instead, Dante simply said, "You're right." Victor's smile disappeared. "I destroyed my family before you ever touched that drive." Victor stared at him. Dante stepped closer. "You just gave me someone else to blame." But before Victor could respond, sirens appeared beyond the road. Federal agents, state police. Dante had done something the old Dante Bellini would never have considered. He had turned over evidence. Everything. The financial records, the altered security files, the names of corrupt officials. Even information that would cost several Bellini businesses millions. Victor looked toward the flashing lights, then back at Dante. "You're destroying the family." Dante shook his head. "No." A pause. "You did." Victor reached for his gun. He never got it out. Dante's men moved first. Victor was disarmed. Pinned to the floor, handcuffed. Minutes later, the man who had arranged Elena's imprisonment was driven away. This time, Dante watched. But unlike 7 years earlier, he knew the person inside that vehicle was actually guilty. The weeks that followed were brutal for the Bellini organization. Investigations expanded, businesses closed, properties were seized. Men Dante had known for years were questioned. Dante cooperated where Elena's case was concerned. He gave investigators access to files that proved evidence against her had been fabricated. He accepted the consequences. And eventually, Elena Monroe's conviction was formally overturned. Not reduced, not hidden, overturned. Her name was cleared. The announcement appeared across Chicago news stations. Reporters gathered outside courthouses. Legal analysts discussed corruption inside the original investigation. For the first time in years, Elena saw her own photograph on television without the word convicted beneath it. She switched the television off. Nico looked at her. "Does that mean everybody knows you didn't do it?" Elena smiled. "Yes." Nico considered this seriously. "Good." Then he returned to his cereal. Elena laughed. Children had a remarkable ability to reduce 7 years of agony to the only part that mattered. Good. Dante did not attend the press conference. He could have stood beside Elena, could have positioned himself as the man who exposed the conspiracy. He didn't. This wasn't his victory. It was hers. Instead, he waited outside afterward. No convoy, no photographers, one car. Elena saw him from the courthouse steps. For a moment, the image resembled another courthouse years earlier. Except this time, Elena wasn't in handcuffs, and Dante wasn't turning away. She walked toward him. Dante handed her a folder. Inside were documents transferring several legitimate assets to a trust for Nico. Elena's expression hardened. I don't want your money. It isn't for forgiveness. Then what is it? His, Dante explained. Anything Nico inherited from the Bellini side would be legitimate, protected, independent. No criminal obligations. No expectation that he would ever enter Dante's world. Elena looked at him carefully. You're giving up his claim to the Bellini organization. He isn't property. The answer surprised her. Dante continued. If he wants nothing to do with me when he's old enough to decide, I'll accept it. Elena said nothing. Dante looked toward the courthouse. There are things I can fix. Then he looked back at her. And things I can't. That night, Nico asked Elena whether Dante was really his father. The question had been coming. Elena sat beside him. This time, she told him the truth. Not every violent detail, not every betrayal, but enough. Dante was his father. Dante had made a terrible mistake. Other people had lied. Dante had believed them. Then Dante learned the truth. Nico listened. His brow furrowed. Did he know about me? Elena's throat tightened. No. Why? Because that answer belonged to 7 years of pain. Elena chose honesty. Because people hid my letters from him. Nico considered it, then asked the harder question. Would he have come if he knew? Elena couldn't answer, not truthfully. Because the Dante who existed now might have. The Dante who existed then, she no longer knew. Several days later, Nico asked if he could see him. Elena stared. You don't have to, I know. Are you sure? Nico shrugged in the way only 7-year-old boys could shrug while rearranging an adult's entire world. I want to ask him something. So Elena called Dante. He arrived 20 minutes early, then waited in his car until the exact time she had given him. Elena noticed that too. Dante sat across from Nico at a small cafe beside the lake. For several minutes, the conversation was painfully awkward. Nico drank chocolate milk. Dante drank coffee he never touched. Finally, Nico asked, Are you really a mafia boss? Elena nearly choked. Dante looked at her, then back at Nico. That's complicated. Nico frowned. Mum says complicated means adults don't want to answer. For the first time, Dante laughed. A real laugh. Elena had forgotten what it sounded like. The tension broke. Only slightly, but enough. Nico asked whether Dante knew how to play chess. Dante said yes. Nico said Aaron was terrible at it. Across the table, Elena hid a smile. That was how it began. Not with forgiveness. Not with declarations. With chess, 20-minute visits became an hour became occasional afternoons. Dante never arrived uninvited, never demanded holidays, never used the word custody. He simply showed up when Elena allowed him to, and every time, Nico trusted him a little more. Months passed. Victor Bellini was convicted on multiple charges. Camilla accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Several officials involved in Elena's case were removed or prosecuted. The Bellini empire survived, smaller. Cleaner in the places Dante could make clean. Different. So was Dante. One evening, after Nico had fallen asleep upstairs, Dante stood outside Elena's apartment preparing to leave. Elena walked him to the door. He thanked her for allowing the visit, then turned away. Dante. He stopped. Elena hadn't said his name like that in years. Not angrily, not fearfully. Simply, Dante. He looked back. She studied him for a long moment. The man before her still had Dante Bellini's face, still carried the same quiet authority, still had enough power to frighten half of Chicago. But the man who once believed power gave him the right to make every decision alone, was gone, or trying to be. Elena spoke carefully. I can't go back. Dante's expression remained calm. I know. I mean it. I know. The marriage we had is over. A slight pause. Yes. Elena had expected him to fight. He didn't. And strangely, that made the next words easier. But maybe. Dante's eyes lifted. Elena almost smiled at how quickly the feared mafia boss suddenly looked afraid. Maybe we don't have to go back. Silence. We could start somewhere else. Dante didn't move. Elena folded her arms. One dinner. He stared. No guards at the table. Dante nodded immediately. No business calls. Another nod. And if you start interrogating the waiter because my food takes too long, I'm leaving. A faint smile appeared. Understood. Elena opened the door. Dante stepped outside. Then she added, "This isn't forgiveness." He looked at her. "I know. It isn't a promise. I know." Elena's expression softened. "Good night, Dante." "Good night, Elena." He walked toward his car. She watched him leave. 7 years earlier, Dante Bellini had turned his back while Elena was dragged away. That night, he looked over his shoulder once. Elena was still standing in the doorway. Neither smiled. Not yet. But Elena didn't close the door until his car disappeared. Several months later, Dante sat on a bench beside the lake while Nico attempted to skip stones across the water. The first sank immediately. The second nearly hit a duck. Dante decided not to mention that. The third bounced twice. Nico threw both arms into the air as though he had conquered Europe. Elena watched from several steps away. She had once believed healing would mean forgetting. It didn't. She remembered everything. The accusations, the handcuffs, the prison, the nights she held Nico, and wondered whether Dante knew he existed. None of it disappeared. But the memories no longer controlled every decision she made. Nico picked up another stone, then turned toward Dante. "Dad, look at this one." Dante froze. The stone remained in Nico's hand. The lake continued moving. People continued walking along the path. But for Dante, everything stopped. Nico hadn't noticed what he said. He was already preparing to throw. Dante looked toward Elena. Her eyes were wet. She gave the smallest nod. Dante swallowed, then turned back toward the boy. "I'm watching." Nico threw. The stone skipped once, twice, 3 times. And as his son celebrated beside him, Dante Bellini finally understood something his power had never been able to teach him. A family could be destroyed in one decision, but rebuilding one happened in thousands of smaller choices. Elena had survived without him. Nico had grown without him. Neither owed Dante Bellini a place in their lives. That was exactly why. Every place they gave him meant everything. Years earlier, Dante had believed love meant protecting what belonged to him. He knew better now. Love was listening when it would be easier to judge, trusting when fear demanded suspicion, and knowing that the people you loved were never possessions to command. Dante Bellini had once sent his innocent pregnant wife to prison because he trusted a lie more than her voice. He could never erase that night. He could never return the years prison stole. But when Elena eventually reached for his hand beside that quiet lake, Dante did not tighten his grip. He simply held hers gently and let her decide how long she wanted to stay. Because this time, Dante Bellini had finally learned to listen.